often, but it's a lot different when you're trying to tell your story, as opposed to just teaching on a Sunday night. So, so I'll go ahead and start. It was tough to cram 54 years into 20 minutes, but we'll try here. Some grow up with godly examples of parents, but that's not my story. Unlike my wife, who took our kids to church, took them to Sunday school, took them to upward soccer, football, cheerleading, Cub Scouts, all that stuff, my mom's attention was focused on work, happy hour, parties, and alcohol. The results were 7 failed marriages, a DWI, broken arms, broken ribs, broken nose, broken cheekbone, and multiple black eyes. When you grow up in that environment, you tend to remember the little things. Like, you remember the night, many nights at the skating rink because it was free babysitting. And you remember being the last kid at 1 a.m. on the curb and the owner coming outside saying, "Are you sure you don't need a ride? Are your parents going to be here?" And then your parents come in drunk, hitting the curb at 1 a.m. You remember the football game where you made the tackle and the helmet hit you in the left elbow and broke your arm. Of course, your mom wasn't there at the game, but she came late, drunk, to pick you up when the bus arrived. And the coach came and told her that you needed to go to the doctor and that your arm might be broke. And she proceeds to call you the P word and says, "You don't need to go to no darn doctor." You remember a week later, after your mom sees you in a cast and leaves town, that she finally acknowledges that you have a broken arm. You remember living at friends' houses for weeks at a time because you weren't wanted at your own home. You remember for months when your name in your house was Little A-hole. Those are the little things that you remember. Some have dads that love to play ball with their kids, maybe take them fishing, but that wasn't my dad. See, every other Friday night for years, I would go outside the house and I would sit on the curb, and my mom would say, "He's probably not going to show." And I would sit on the curb and I'd say, "This Friday's different, Mom." And then she'd say, "It's time for dinner." And I'd say, "No, I'm not eating dinner because Dad's going to take me out. This time's different, Mom." And I would sit on the curb, sometimes till 10 or 11 at night, and miss dinner. But when he did show up, I'd have a blast because my dad was always present. Now, he kind of had to work, so he would show me his business when he showed up. First, I got to meet the ladies at the friendly establishment he managed called the Body Shop, where the clientele were, shall we say, unique. The sheriff came by and he got more than donuts, if you know what I mean. So after that business, he got a promotion. He went into the distribution business. That was where I first saw a 75-pound burlap sack of marijuana. And he would pick me up and he would say, "This weekend I gotta work." And then he would drop me off at the arcade with a $20 bill in the 80s, which was a bunch of money back then, right? Because he had 3 burlap sacks that needed to be delivered. He'd show me where the airplane drops them at night. He would come on the weekends, and I got to notice there'd be occasionally a bullet hole in the back of the car window and other little things. I also remember being at his ranch one time and went to get my motorcycle gloves. Of course, he was swimming in cash, so that was a good part. But I went to get my motorcycle gloves to ride my dirt bike, and as I pulled them out, there's thousands of dollars in each glove. I learned other things. I can remember him showing me the test kit and how when you mix the chemicals with it, you can tell whether it's baby powder or cocaine. Then, predictably, you can imagine, at age 11, I found myself in the federal courtroom with Sandra Day O'Connor as the judge, sentencing my father to the federal penitentiary. Once again, it's little things that you remember. I remember visiting my dad when he was wearing the orange jumpsuit. At the time in prison, they only allowed him to have dimes. For some reason, I remember the dimes and what that might feel like. I remember the calendar I had on the wall because at the time in the house I was living in, I was being called a little a-hole. So I would scratch the days off the calendar, thinking that my dad was finally going to come and rescue me. Easily with this childhood, the world would say I'd have no hope. But God continually pursued me. You see, in middle school, I found out that there was a Methodist church right across the street, and they had cute girls. And the rumor was that they allowed dancing. So I firmly believed that I must be a Methodist. So I started going to the Methodist church. I had a stepbrother who was 5 years older, and he had wheels because my mom was way too busy partying to take me to church. So I started going to church. Things are looking up. I got with the youth group because they had cute girls. I went to the ski trip that they had, and Satan, get back, and went to the ski trip with them. Everything's looking well, and my brother, who was my ride, started getting involved with church as well. And when he did, he befriended the pastor's son, who was his age as well. So he went over to the pastor's house for a sleepover, and the pastor tried to crawl in bed with my brother. Luckily, nothing happened, but what had happened was the church didn't do a background check. And that pastor apparently had had that habit, and each church just moved him. But what that did to me was that confirmed to me that church must be evil, and I don't need any part of church, or God for that matter. So I began to run, just like Jonah, away from God. 5 years later, I went with my brother to get a haircut, and there were cute girls there. You see where this is going, don't you? So they invited us to church. We, of course, said yes, because they were cute. And little did we know the name of the church was Word of Faith by Robert Tilton. If anyone is old enough to remember that, then they might remember. But Robert Tilton was a famous TV preacher, and he had a daytime program, and he would talk into the TV, and he would say, it's my best impression, we'll see how it goes. He would say, there's somebody out there that has a $5,000 vow. So, I got there, we spent the first 15 minutes of the service, and there was no mention of God. It was all about politics, everything else, until the offering plate. Now, let me rephrase that. It wasn't the offering plate. It was a red 5-gallon bucket, okay? Now, this is the 80s, and you probably remember those huge TV cameras, that the guy has to kind of drive, And they had multiple of those all around the church, and they had purposely trained the cameraman to follow the bucket so that you were on camera, on TV when it came time to give. And those of you who know me know that I'm not a get-along to go-along kind of guy. So when the camera got to me, I put that bucket down on the floor and I said, Russ, it's time we hit the road. And we stood up, and I did not pass it to the next person, and I got out of there. And Satan succeeded in keeping me from church again and confirming my thought that I needed to continue to run from God. Satan's plans were working. Years later, in my mid-20s, years later, you're probably not going to guess what happened, but I ran into some cute girls. There's a theme here. They invited me to church, and a youth... They invited me to church and a youth adult Bible study. And this time was different. The people were genuine. Everything was real. They were down to earth. And I went to this Bible study, and something snapped because I heard this lady teach the Word of God, like every verse, and then she explained it and how it applied to my life and the context of it, and something just lit inside of me. And I'd like to tell you that from that on point, it was all good. But, change comes in small forms. But when you have a real encounter with God, you can't help but be changed. And so what happened was I started to change, and it started with small changes. Like in my life, I started to prioritize going to the home group and that type of thing. And then as I started to change, I started to notice something. I started to notice things weren't the same between me and my girlfriend. And I started praying about that. And then one day, the Holy Spirit answered. And the Holy Spirit said, not audibly, but this is what I got from it, was, Cody, you can pray all you want, but it's up to you to take the first step. You need to kick her to the curb, And so, being the cowardly guy that I was, I patiently waited for her to mess up, right? You been there, guys? You're waiting for her to mess up. So I'm waiting and waiting, and she wouldn't mess up. So I finally had to do it. So I finally had to call her in, and then I sheepishly said, I'm going to have to break up. And she said, why? I said, God told me to do it. That went over about like a turd in a punch bowl. It did not go good. But I say all of that to say that in 1 Samuel 15:22, the Lord says obedience is better than sacrifice. Absolutely. And that did not go void with me, because 6 months later, the neighbor's flight attendant daughter named Heather knocked on my door to deliver mail personally to me. So I immediately told my 2 other roommates, I said, now guys, listen to me. The girl next door, she's cute, but that's not the point. The point here is you can't date the girl next door, because if you do and it goes south, we have to move, and we got a good thing going here, And then right after I got them off the trail, I asked her out immediately. I was smitten at first sight. Within 2 years, we were married and baptized. Yes, I got baptized then because I got run out of the church before I ever got baptized when I was initially saved in junior high. Married life was amazing and dreamy, but we noticed one thing was missing. We wanted a family. 5 years, after 5 long years of battling with infertility, tears, disappointments, insensitive friends, and a lesson there about sharing too much, multiple infertility trips, failed IVF, which of course is not covered by insurance, all out of cash. And the point was it drained our savings, drained us physically, emotionally, and spiritually. We were down to our last shot. The last shot was adoption. So at that point, we had no savings. So Heather took a second job. She was a beer girl at the golf course, in addition to school teaching. So that way she could work weekends and summers. She saved every penny. We cut all of our bills, and we started building the war chest for paying for adoption. If you don't know how expensive adoption is, look it up one day. Let's just say cars are cheaper, new cars. So, having said all that, we finally saved up the money, and Heather made the call to Gladney. The caseworker said, you know, the waiting list is long. It's probably going to take you all years to get through this. But the process was we had to make a scrapbook and tell about us and what we could offer a child. And the birth mothers would look at that scrapbook. So Heather, being artistic, made this beautiful scrapbook. And the caseworker set the scrapbook on her desk as an example to all the prospective adoptive parents on how to do one. She was the gold standard. So because she was out on the desk on top as the sample, a caseworker for the birth mother said, I've got a picky birth mother and she won't accept anybody. And she says, this couple is perfect. And of course the caseworker said, you can't get them, they just got in the program. They haven't waited the 2 years. So God worked it out. We skipped to the front of the line. And in God's perfect timing, it was 9 months from the time Heather called until Hudson was born. Then everything is dreamy, right? No. Satan attacked again. So Heather quit the beard job. She quit teaching, and she was stay-at-home mom. First 4 months, everything's great, and then Satan attacks. I get laid off. So here we are, no income and a baby. Heather calls the golf course and gets back to work as a beer girl, trying to make ends meet while I feverishly look for a job and become a stay-at-home dad, which made me quite close with Hudson. So through this, I ended up taking a straight commission job because I couldn't stay at home anymore or see my wife pay the bills. So I worked 60 hours a week, straight commission, and luckily I have a natural ability for sales. Came from my dad. I can sell an oscillating fan to an Eskimo, so it's one of those gifts I have. So it worked out well. I could pay the bills, work 60 hours a week, and Heather got to stay home. So all was good. And Hudson, I have to say, other than JFK Jr., I think he's the most photographed baby ever. 20 months later, after several commission jobs later, a move to McKinney and other things, Heather attends a new women's Bible study in McKinney, and a lady says, would you be interested in adopting again? Meanwhile, I'm at work slaving away on a Tuesday, and I get the call. Heather says, do you want another baby boy? And I said, yeah, sure, why not? And Heather says, great, because she's due Thursday. Yes, I said Thursday. So in 48 hours, we feverishly got everything together. And then we were prepped and ready. And then we got the call that the doctor gave her 2 more weeks. And then we headed down to Waco. Let me see where I'm at. We get to Waco, and those that don't know the adoption process, I have to tell you, it's not a stress-free process. In the state of Texas, the birth mother has 48 hours to sign the paperwork. During that 48 hours, she obviously is an emotional wreck, right? And you have 0 rights, and you don't know whether she's going to sign until she finally signs. So during that 48 hours, she reached out to her ex. Her parents are there, and Heather and I are not sleeping at all. Nervous as all get out. And then, on top of it, the hospital staff, in order to protect the rights of the birth parents, treated us as baby thieves. We were not allowed to go hardly anywhere in the hospital without a hospital staff member supervising our every move. And all of this until she actually signed. And then when she signed, it flipped on a dime. And the staff was so generous. And they were so relieved, and they said, oh my gosh, the baby is so beautiful. I can't believe you're doing this. This is so amazing. Said, we were praying for you the whole time because we saw the birth mother going to the smoking area every 10 minutes. And then we overheard the call with the birth father at the prison, and we knew that God must have sent y'all here. Yeah. Part of the things about the legal system is the birthright of the parents is highly protected, such that if the birth father does not sign, then the adoptive parents have to spend thousands of dollars for an attorney on his behalf. Okay. 7 years later, incidentally, Shep was born 2 days before our anniversary. So 7 days later, or 7 years later, we're out celebrating Shepard's birthday, our anniversary, and Heather gets an email. You can probably guess. Would you be interested in adopting a girl this time? And the email goes on to say that it's the grandmother's dying wish because her 4-year-old granddaughter is in a hard place and her wish is that a Christian family would adopt them. So Heather contacts the birth mother and then goes to East Texas and picks up Lola Grace, which y'all know here. Lola, she picked up Lola from an ex-boyfriend that the birth mother had dropped off for 8 months and never come back. When Lola came into our house, she was just a joy. The kids totally embraced her. But one of the things that I want to point out here is that when you let something into your house or someone into your house There's the physical and the spiritual. And unfortunately, she had had some very dark things happen to her, and the spiritual came with her. Like in the book of Job, when in the book of Job, the devil comes up and he says he can't attack Job because there's a hedge of protection, right? Well, when you, out of free will, you open the door for that. So the amount of things that happened to her in the hard times manifest itself in spiritual warfare in our house. Lola, at 1 or 2 in the morning, would wake up screaming and running through the house. And she would say that monsters are chasing her. And she would not be consoled. And she would just continue to run. And she would try to get out all the doors. And then finally, she'd get so exhausted, she'd projectile throw up. And that was every night for months. And then Heather would sit down with her, put a blanket over both of them, and she called that Pony World. And that's where Heather would minister to Lola and talk through it. Lola was traumatized because of the things she saw and the things that the boyfriends did, holding a gun to her mom's head and saying that she would kill her mother if she ever said anything. But the good thing about God is even in the midst of the storm, he can still give you humor, right? So Lola, she didn't have school or anything like that. So Heather got her into a Episcopal preschool, and you have to see this. So this Episcopal preschool teacher must have been there for 30 years. Very marmish, very stuffy. And we tried to warn the school that Lola comes from a little different background here, you know? So anyway, I'll cut to the chase. It was circle time in her classroom, and the letter of the day was R. So Lola raised her hand. You know how Lola is, so excited. And she says, I know a word that starts with R, reefer. And the teacher says, thinking fast on her feet, she goes, oh, Lola, you mean like an ocean reefer. And then Lola says, no, a reefer like Mama Ashley. So that was the first of many calls to the principal's office where Heather had to politely explain that she wasn't talking about her adoptive mother, but she was talking about her birth mother. Now, we took Lola on a promise because the birth mother wasn't ready to sign. So a couple of months go into this, and we get a call one day. And the call to Heather is from the birth mother. And the birth mother says, I'm ready to sign, but I have one request. And the first thing we're thinking is, oh my gosh, she wants a kilo, a new car, what is it, right? And then she says, it was neither. She said, it's not fair to her sister. And then Heather said, how many do you have? And she said, well, there's only one more, but she's in a bad place. I dropped her off with her father, who's an ex-con addicted to meth, and you need to go get her. Nothing prepares you for these type of storms. So we pack up and we head out with lots of prayer. Let me find out where I'm in my notes. Sorry. And we prepare all the paperwork. We call the attorney. We find out that the birth father has $10,000 in back child support. So we show up in the hood, and I'm in the car with the car running with all three kids, and then Heather goes out because I don't want to escalate the situation with a guy showing up, and it's not the type of thing that you can call ahead, right? So we're showing up unannounced at this house that we don't even know the person, and Heather comes and knocks on the door. He comes out, and then she explains to him very tactfully, you know how Heather is, here's the paperwork, and, this will solve your legal problems and the back child support, and it'll also give you an opportunity for JC, Izzy, I've got this middle name thing going, I don't know, but Izzy to be reunited with her sister and all that, and I know you probably need time to think about this. This is a big decision. And he says, I don't need no time. And then he says, give me that. He grabs the paperwork. He walks over to the back of his pickup. He pulls the beer cooler over, slams the paperwork down, and then starts signing. And then he sticks it and hands it back to Heather. And when he does, he looks at beautiful Izzy's eyes. He looks at her in the eyes. She's 6.5 years old. He looks at her in the eyes, and he said, get her caca and get her out of here. I never want to see her again. We proceed to grab a hefty bag and put her in the car. She goes in the car between our kids in the back seat, and she's shaking like a little rabbit. And her sister has her arm around her, and I'm thinking, we got to do something to release the tension here. So I said, of course, Whataburger. So we all go to Whataburger. We're sitting there. She's still scared like a rabbit, and I'm thinking, I got to break the ice. And I noticed she had both of her front teeth missing. So I said, so Izzy, I said, did the tooth fairy come? And then the tears start coming. And then I'm trying to think quick on my feet, what did I do again? And I said, well, Heather, she knows the tooth fairy. And a lot of times when people move a lot, the tooth fairy doesn't get the change of address. And Heather can solve that. And then she says, no, that's not it. And I said, what is it? I said, they wouldn't give me a pillow. And then she goes on to say that, do you have an air conditioner? And this is in East Texas in September. And we said, of course we have an air conditioner. I said, y'all don't have an air conditioner at your house? And she says, yeah, we do, but I left the door open and my dad took my window unit out. So I say all that to say that, I'd like to tell you, that we had this perfect family of 6 that you see here, and that it was all perfect now because we got our family together. But this was just the beginning of the spiritual battles. Let me be careful with my words, but when Izzy arrived to our house, the house was never the same. That is not Izzy's fault. She was an innocent child, but the level of trauma that she endured was profound. We, out of our free will and for the sake of the girls, let them in the house, not knowing what else we let in. What followed was years of therapy, inpatient, outpatient, residential treatment, school counselors, church issues, sibling conflicts, CPS interviews, work incidents, police interactions, rejection, judgment from new friends, old friends, family, and etc. There was an initial darkness in the girl's eyes that was visible. it took months to actually see the light back in their eyes. I can't tell you all the stories, but I'll just tell you a couple. We've been put through the ringer. We've been, she's tried to push us down the stairs. She came at her brother with a steak knife. She attempted to jump out of a 3-story window. She's stolen our credit cards. We've been falsely accused of abuse. I can go on and on. The stories are endless. None of this was her fault, obviously. Due to the abuse, Izzy had been rejected all of her life, and her coping mechanism was to steal and manipulate. And this caused constant chaos in our house. She knew from the enemy that she was not worthy of being loved. So she tried to be as mean as possible so we would reject her. Because in her mind, she knew we were going to reject her and she might as well get it over with quick. I can recall one manic episode when she was 9 years old. We were taking her to the ER. We were in the minivan and I was trying to hold her because she was trying to jump out of the car full speed on the highway. She was biting, kicking, cussing, pinching, screaming, all of those things, and then it would pivot. And then all of a sudden, she would say, "I'm glad y'all are taking me to the ER because I'm going to go to this hospital, and I'm going to go to the next hospital, and I'm going to go to a treatment center, and I'm going to drain every dollar you have." I tell you this to tell you that we were dealing with the spiritual, not the physical. I can't explain things unless you were there. On another, at that particular hospital visit, she was in a lockdown unit, and Izzy is incredibly intelligent. And she had memorized the code from the nurses, and she'd figured out the code, and she was attempting to escape, and they caught her, and they had to change the code in the hospital because of a 9-year-old girl. On one particular incident, she was manic. We were in the living room, and I was holding her down, and she was fighting and screaming and hitting, and I was trying to protect her from herself and hurting others, and we were just kind of at our wits' end, and I told Heather, I said, just grab the Bible. And when I did, we flipped it open to John, and I was about to start reading, and then this voice came out of her, and she said, "My God is the devil." And it was deep. Now, we were freaked, but it instilled our discipline to go ahead and read the Bible. And we kept reading out of the Bible, and a few minutes later, all of a sudden, it broke, and the tears came in her eyes. And then she looked up and she said, "Daddy, I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. I love you." I say all this to say that our battle is out of Ephesians 6. It's in the spiritual realm. We finally learned to parent her. Through all the runaway episodes, we had finally noticed that if we stop chasing her, she won't run. I'd like to say that I learned that from CR, but I learned it the hard way. And then you have to understand her perspective. She was ignored and abused and got no attention her whole life. So from her perspective, any attention is a good thing. Negative attention is good, which from a parenting perspective puts you in a tailspin because nothing works. Unfortunately, Satan wasn't done attacking us. So I'll try to speed up here, but Shep, our youngest son, had befriended a kid in California on Xbox, and the kid sent him a pentagram. We found out about this later. I had a whole discussion about him, about the significance of that, and I'd always warned him about drugs because of my dad's past, and he shrugged it off, accepted the pentagram, and shared it with others. Within weeks of this incident, Shepard went from being the very popular starting middle linebacker in the middle school to being perp walked by the McKinney PD on possession charges. We thought this is an isolated incident, he'll get over it. But Shepard accepted that new identity. He accepted being the bad boy, and he believed the lie that he couldn't go back to what he was. When he did that, the drug dealers in McKinney saw a popular kid, and they seized the opportunity. They decided they would be his supplier, and he would get everything for free as long as he distributes for them. This predictably ended with Heather calling me and us rushing to the hospital with an OD episode of our youngest son. Thankfully, God protected him. We took him to a rehab in Florida where he spent 4 months. And Shepard has been clean ever since. Praise Jesus. And we are very proud of him. You see, the point is, Heather and I tried to protect, strength, restore, and save our children from the critical fires at the moment in our lives. And I could keep going, but through that process, it spent us. It was emotionally, physically, and spiritually draining. Satan tried to take out our marriage through all these trials. But instead, we prayed together and we stayed together. We tried for so long to do everything in our own strength, despite our faith in Jesus. We didn't understand principles 1 and 3 that we just went over, that A, we're not God, and we did not trust our kids fully in the care of Christ. When I joined CR in February of 22, I joined because I'd done prison ministry. I wanted to do it again, and the prerequisite was you need to do CR. So I'm doing it for that reason, right? I don't need CR, right? You know how that story goes. So I instantly realized I had control issues. So I started praying about my control issues of trying to protect all my kids from life's consequences, especially Izzy. Like I said, I joined in February of 22. By April of 22, or May, early May, somewhere around in there, Izzy left our house 2 weeks before her high school graduation, and not with our blessing. She ran away again. This time we didn't chase her. We prayed. We let her know that we still love her, but we're here. I can't tell you the pain that causes when you pour that much into a child and you see them throw it all away, and all your friends are going to their graduations, and we're not there. But the road has not been easy. It has been full of life lessons for her and us. We've had totaled cars, lost jobs, multiple moves, ODs, and in the process, God has done amazing things. I have learned that Izzy and my children are better off in His control and not mine. She is now working as a CNA nurse right here in Bonham, and she's paying her own bills. And the Lord, in His wisdom, surrounded her with many of you right here that are being His hands and feet. Because the Lord is not done with Izzy. Now, I don't know where you are in your relationship with the Lord, but I can testify to the goodness of God. I went through several years being bitter, looking back at how my mom treated me in my childhood. I went through time when I didn't even speak with her. But I realized that all that bitterness and that anger was just hurting me. I let it go. It took me a long time because I didn't know CR Step 6 about forgiveness. My parents to this very day are still flawed, but I love them as they are. And I'm trying to teach my children to do the same. My dad never conquered his addiction demons, but his time in prison and rehab multiple times gave him the opportunity to study his Bible and get to know his Savior. In August 2013, I sat by his bedside in Houston, Texas, and the hospice nurse came in, and she said, I need to know this question. Said, Ron Lee, you are refusing all treatment for your cancer, and I am not supposed to do any life-saving measures, and you only want comfort. Is that correct? And he said, absolutely. My home is in heaven, and Jesus is my Savior. See, my dad knew where his hope was. He had plenty of flaws, but he knew where his hope was. My last conversations with my dad, they weren't focused on the past. They were focused on our common theme that we had. We both loved Jesus. And that's what we talked about, and we talked about where he was going. You see, with all the free will we have, and at his I'll have to say, at his funeral, I could have focused on my family that stuck Heather and I with the bill for the funeral, the catering for 100 barbecue in Houston, that stole my dad's classic Camaros, his coin collection, his gun, and all the possessions that were promised to me, his only child. But I did get an 8x10 glossy, and it was in a frame. But instead, I chose to focus on the joy of seeing my 4 children singing God's praise at his funeral. So I encourage you, I'm over time here, but I encourage you to focus on the positive and know that although, we went through a lot of times that were difficult, the girls, they brought us blessings and joy, and the richness of our lives without the girls, I can't imagine. And even in the darkest times when things were rough, God even sent Charlie, our dog, to show us unconditional love, because that's just the kind of God he is. So God uses our trials to draw us closer to him, refine us, and show us his everlasting love. He loves me, and I know I'm his favorite, and you might ask why. I know why. Because that lady over there, Heather, she agreed to marry me before the background check cleared. Based on my background, you'd think I'd be the last person sitting here talking to you or teaching on a Sunday in Bible study. But God wasn't done with me. And I just say that as you leave here tonight, that you focus on the blessings and look for God in the midst of the storm. I love y'all, and I just wish that you dwell with the richness and the love of Christ and that you'd know his love. And as we close, if this works, Sonia or Shauna, can you play the last? Click on that little picture of Lola right there. There should be a video, maybe. If you click on it, maybe it'll work. If it doesn't, nope. Okay. Well, I was going to leave you with a cute song for Lola singing, but that's okay. I just thank you for your time and your grace in hearing my story. Sorry I was a little over.